$15.8 billion. That's what Mercedes-Benz earned in net profit in 2023. 2 years later, that number collapsed to $5.8 billion. And nothing explains it away because there wasn't a recession, there wasn't a financial crisis, and the luxury goods market worldwide kept booming the entire time. Mercedes just lost nearly 2/3 of its profits while selling some of the most expensive cars on the road. And the worst part is that the bleeding hasn't stopped. What you're about to hear is the story of how Mercedes-Benz went from the untouchable king of luxury automobiles to a company cutting 20,000 jobs, watching its electric flagship become an industry punchline, and getting outsold in China by brands that most Americans couldn't name if you paid them. Almost nobody is covering this the way it deserves to be covered, and that changes right now. Getting to the bottom of how Mercedes ended up here means going back to the moment they convinced themselves they had cracked the code. Between 2022 and 2023, Mercedes put up numbers that looked almost too good to be real, with revenue north of $165 billion and margins that left even the most skeptical analysts stunned. CEO Ola Källenius built an entire corporate identity around one big idea, which was that Mercedes would stop building cars for everyone and start building objects of desire for people willing to pay top dollar. Prices climbed, margins ballooned, and for a short stretch, it looked like Källenius had pulled off something historic. And that's where things started to unravel, because Mercedes mistook luck for strategy. Those record profits weren't really the product of a brilliant luxury pivot. A global chip shortage had squeezed supply across the entire auto industry, which meant fewer cars sitting on dealer lots, almost zero negotiating room for buyers, and artificially inflated prices everywhere. When chips started flowing again and production ramped back up, the math should have been obvious to anyone paying attention. Demand for cars priced above $100,000 simply wasn't as deep as Mercedes had assumed. But rather than course correct, they doubled down, and the first place that gamble exploded was their brand new electric flagship. Mercedes poured years of engineering into chasing a single number, a drag coefficient of 0.20, and they got it. The EQS became the most aerodynamic production car ever built. Technically, that's an achievement worth celebrating, but visually it turned into a catastrophe. The $100,000-plus sedan looked like an inflated jelly bean, so smooth and so rounded that customers barely recognized it as a Mercedes at all. James Cameron and Alicia Keys appeared at the 2021 unveiling, and Mercedes branded it as their most important launch in decades. Buyers saw it differently, and the phrase that kept showing up in reviews and forums was, "not a real Mercedes." That aerodynamic egg shape carved away rear headroom and legroom, which turned out to be fatal in China, where wealthy buyers ride in the back seat and expect to stretch out without bumping their heads. No frunk existed anywhere under the hood, and actually getting the hood open required finding a hidden fastener tucked beneath the dashboard. For a car that cost more than most people's homes, the ownership experience felt cheap in all the wrong places. What happened at dealerships confirmed everything. EQS sales in the United States plunged 52% in 2024, the EQE dropped 39%, and the EQB fell 36%. Across the entire globe, the EQS never cracked 30,000 units in a single year. Bloomberg published a piece in May of 2024, warning that the EQS risks becoming one of the biggest flops in Mercedes' storied history. And then came the admission that made everything worse. Design chief Gordon Wagener sat down with Autocar in July of 2025 and admitted the EQS arrived probably 10 years too early. His exact words about what should have been done differently were that Mercedes should have marketed it differently, more like a futuristic CLS, S-Class coupe, or something like that. 5 months after that interview, Wagener lost his job. Bloomberg described the shakeup as Källenius tightening control, heading into what they called a make-or-break 2026. No second generation of the EQS will ever exist. Mercedes plans to fold it into the next S-Class on a single platform covering combustion, plug-in hybrid, and full electric, which is essentially the same playbook BMW already ran with the 7 Series. But the EQS disaster wasn't just a product that missed the mark. It was a symptom of a much deeper strategic collapse that was already in motion. Back in 2021, Mercedes stood in front of the world and promised to go fully electric by 2030 wherever market conditions allowed, with an interim target of 50% electrified sales by 2025. The entire EQ lineup from the EQS to the EQE to the EQA and EQB was supposed to carry them into the future. None of it panned out. Battery electric vehicles accounted for just 9.3% of total Mercedes sales in 2024, which means the 50% target wasn't just missed, it wasn't even in the same neighborhood. Unit numbers told the same story, with 185,100 EVs sold in 2024, representing a 23% decline, followed by another slide to 168,800 in 2025 for a 9% drop on top of the previous year's losses. On February 22nd of 2024, Källenius officially killed the electric by 2030 promise and told the press that combustion engine models would remain in production well into the 2030s. The new target became a vague up to 50% electrified by the second half of the decade. And when a CEO has to walk back an entire electrification strategy on camera, that's not a pivot, that's a retreat. What nobody expected came in September of 2025, when the United States eliminated the EV tax credit. Mercedes responded by pausing American production of the EQE and EQS sedans and SUVs for 4 straight months, 4 months of silence on the assembly line for vehicles that were supposed to represent the company's future. One bright spot does exist in the form of the new CLA, unveiled in March of 2025 as the first car built on Mercedes' new MMA architecture. Range tops out at 484 miles on the European test cycle, with about 374 miles on the EPA rating, and US pricing starts at $47,250. European Car of the Year. Honors followed for 2026, and electric vehicle orders from Europe more than doubled during the first quarter of 2026. Whether a single well-received model can undo an entire failed electric strategy is a question worth about $1 billion, and Mercedes doesn't have a clear answer yet. Understanding the real scale of what's happening to Mercedes requires looking at China, because China wasn't just an important sales region. It functioned as the life insurance policy for the entire company. Mercedes moved more cars there than in any other country, and the profits generated in China funded dividends, transformation projects, and quietly papered over mistakes happening everywhere else. And then the whole thing came apart. Not because of an economic meltdown or a geopolitical crisis, but because a generation of wealthy Chinese buyers in their 30s stopped wanting a Mercedes. The 2024 numbers showed 683,600 cars sold in China, a 7% decline that felt manageable at the time. Then, 2025 arrived and sales cratered to 575,000 units, a 19% free fall. The third quarter of that year brought the worst individual quarter since 2016, with deliveries down 27% according to Bloomberg. And when Q1 2026 results came in, the number was the same ugly figure, down 27% again. Chinese manufacturers are the reason this happened. BYD moved 4.27 million new energy vehicles globally in 2024, with roughly 3.86 million of those staying inside China. which means BYD outsold Mercedes on Chinese soil by a ratio of about 5.6 to 1. And these aren't budget commuter cars anymore. BYD's luxury arm Yangwang sells vehicles above $143,000, and their showrooms now occupy locations that previously belonged to Mercedes-Benz, BMW, and Aston Martin dealerships across major Chinese cities. What makes it sting even more is the Huawei-backed Maextro S800 sedan, priced starting around $98,000. December of 2025 saw the Maextro S800 outsell the Mercedes Maybach S-Class by roughly 4 to 1 in the luxury sedan segment, a brand that barely registered 3 years ago, now beating Maybach at its own game in the segment Mercedes once owned outright. And here's where irony becomes cruelty. Mercedes spent 14 years in a joint venture with BYD called Denza, then walked away in September of 2024 by selling off their last 10% stake. BYD's response came in April of 2025 when they launched Denza in Europe starting with Milan, meaning the brand Mercedes helped build from the ground up now competes directly against them on European streets. None of that compares to what BYD pulled off in September of 2025 when the Yangwang U9 Extreme set the production electric vehicle speed record at 308.4 miles per hour, and the location they chose for the record run was a test track in Germany on Mercedes' own home soil. Källenius acknowledged the situation in October of 2025 by saying, "Hyper-competition in China is not going away anytime soon." And Mercedes China chief Oliver Thoen admitted in February of 2026 that sales will remain below 2025 levels the following year. Management isn't even pretending a recovery is around the corner. While China crumbled and the electric strategy collapsed, BMW moved in and took the title that Mercedes had held for years. Global sales in 2024 tell the story plainly. BMW delivered 2.2 million vehicles, while Mercedes delivered 1.98 million. And just like that, BMW reclaimed the position of the world's best-selling luxury automaker. America painted an even uglier picture. BMW delivered 371,346 vehicles in 2024 for a record year, and Mercedes finished at 324,528. By 2025, the gap ripped wide open, with BMW reaching 388,897 for their third consecutive record, while Mercedes managed 303,200, a difference of nearly 86,000 units. And BMW wasn't the only brand ahead of them, because Lexus delivered 370,260 vehicles in the US that same year, pushing Mercedes all the way down to third place in the American luxury market. Third place for Mercedes-Benz in America, behind Lexus, a sentence that would have sounded absurd 5 years ago. The electric comparison drives the point home even harder. BMW delivered 368,523 battery electric vehicles in 2024, while Mercedes delivered 185,100, meaning BMW nearly doubled them on the EV scoreboard in a single year. Both sides of the globe catching fire at the same time left Mercedes with one option, and they took it. Late 2024 brought the launch of a program called Next Level Performance, targeting $5.4 billion in permanent cost savings by 2027, along with a 10% reduction in production costs and a 25% cut to China's operating expenses. The human cost sits at up to 20,000 voluntary job eliminations worldwide, with some reports putting the worst-case scenario at 33,000, which would mean roughly 20% of the entire global workforce. A deal with the IG Metal Union guarantees no forced layoffs until 2034, so Mercedes turned to severance packages instead, and the numbers attached to those packages paint their own picture. One 55-year-old team leader with 30 years at the company walked away with about $583,000, and senior managers received offers reaching up to roughly $540,000. By October of 2025, around 4,000 employees had accepted the deal. German production alone faces a cut of approximately 100,000 vehicles, and the third quarter of 2025 carried about $1.46 billion in restructuring charges, with nearly $950 million tied specifically to the German workforce reduction. Works Council Chief Ergun Lumali put it in the simplest terms possible when he told reporters, "We need growth, 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 and new strategies are needed." Stephen Reitman at Bernstein Research offered his own read in September of 2025, saying, "Incrementalism isn't going to get you to the promised land." Not everything at Mercedes is collapsing, and the parts that are thriving reveal where the real power of this brand still lives. AMG delivered about 145,000 vehicles in 2025, a 7% increase that brought them near record territory. The G-Class hit 49,700 units with a 23% jump to set an all-time high. Even in China, where almost every number pointed downward, the Maybach GLS managed to grow 14%. The first quarter of 2026 brought real momentum across Europe, with overall sales climbing 7%, EV sales jumping 34%, and electrified vehicles accounting for 41% of all Mercedes deliveries on the continent. Early demand for the new CLA looks strong by every available measure. The three-pointed star still carries weight. But those bright spots are propping up a business where everything surrounding them keeps shrinking, which raises the question of how long the strong pieces can carry the weak ones. 15 or more new models are headed to China in 2026. The CLA could reset the electric narrative if buyers keep showing up, and the 2027 Maybach S-Class facelift is arriving with a new V8 and a V12 in the S680. On the other side of the ledger, Trump-era tariffs are projected to shave another 1.5 percentage points off Mercedes' core car-making margins in 2026, according to Reuters. The problem at the center of all of this hasn't changed. Mercedes built its entire identity around being the best engineering, the best luxury, the best technology. And right now, in the world's largest car market, Chinese brands are delivering comparable or superior technology at prices that make Mercedes look like it belongs to a different century. A Huawei-backed sedan outsells Maybach 4-1. BYD shatters speed records on German asphalt, and the brand Mercedes helped create in China just opened its first European showroom. Whether Mercedes survives isn't the question, because it will. The question is whether the Mercedes your father believed in still exists at all.